Thank you. I will be behind here for a very short period of time unless you tell me you can't hear me because I'm a wanderer. Thank you, Marissa, very much for the introduction, and thank you for having us today. Amy and I were to do this program last year about this time, and I had some family situations come up. So we've been looking forward to doing this for about a year. Delighted to have you all here. We will present, but we want questions and we want conversation. So, put your hand up. If it resonates, let us know that. And at the end of today, I have Amy and I brought little bags that have a parting gift, a chocolate kiss in it with both of our business cards. So if you care for one of those on your way out the door, a little sugar, it's waiting for you. Marissa did a wonderful job introducing me, so I don't need to do that. What are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about the past. And we're going to share some new stories and hope share some stories that you in some way connect with. And in the meantime, where we're up here, we're encouraging you to think about the two questions on the board. What is a treasured childhood memory that you have of cooking or food, cuisine, the way you approach different holidays? We would love to hear about that. And how do you share your food traditions today? All right, and with that, I'm going to give you Amy.
Let's see here. Well, like Jiffy, I kind of like to wander, but I know you like to hear me, so I'm going to try to stay back here. We'll see how that goes. Just a little short story about myself. So I, as a volunteer, and we have somebody else here who shares my background, as a volunteer for about 25 years, I did walking tours for the Atlanta Preservation Center, which does tours all over the city, with generally focus on architecture. And in the process of doing that, I started being curious about seeing myself in history. What were women's stories? And that led me on a journey to move from architectural history, which was the primary focus at that point, to looking at social history. And then when my youngest son was in high school, I thought, oh, I suddenly have a little more time. And I went back to Georgia State and I got a master's in history. I like to say that my professors learned about my background and realized that I could talk loudly and talk over buses. And they said, we really need somebody who does real architectural history tours in Atlanta. Why don't you start that company? So that's my retirement project. So I went back and got a master's in history, and my focus is social history and history of the South, really with a focus on the greater Atlanta area. So today I'm going to talk to you about two of my favorite women, because when I look at history and I look at food, I'm thinking about how do we have a record of food? And just to sort of see where we're headed, Jiffy helps people and their families create their own record. So I'm going to talk about the bigger picture, and then Jiffy will talk about folks' experiences in preserving their own family's history. Now, why food? How does food fit into history? I think food is really interesting because it's a way, and kind of an academic term, is it encodes our culture. It encodes our culture. It's a way we preserve our memories. And when we think about food, we think about the multiple ways memories are ingrained and memories are brought up. Aromas bring back memories. Taste brings back memories. Even the physical action of making something brings back your memories of doing this maybe with your grandmother. And by doing that with your grandchildren, you're carrying that tradition on. So I think food is a fascinating way to look at memory. Here in Atlanta, we have a great tradition of hospitality, and that's where I'm starting. I'm going to apologize for the hazy text here. I'm going to tell you about it. Why does Atlanta have such a great tradition of hospitality? There were a few different reasons. In the South, and I'm going back to the 19th century, in the South, towns were farther apart in the North because of the difference in the way agriculture was. And so travelers in the South expected to be able to knock on a door of a house and ask for hospitality, ask for lodging for the night. If you were a homeowner in rural Georgia in 1848, if a person of the same race and the same socioeconomic class as you or higher asked to be put up at your house, the expectation was you would say yes. You could also say, you need to pay me for it. So we have this long tradition. And then following the Civil War, we had a whole group of people whom we called freedmen at the time, who'd been emancipated. And many of them had a tradition, had the skills of being wonderful cooks and knowing how to provide really high quality hospitality. Those folks were all over rural Georgia. They came to Atlanta because they wanted a different kind of life. And here in Atlanta, we had trains. We had many people coming here as visitors, lots of hotels. There was a need for that kind of skill. So there were many jobs that were available. So Atlanta has this long tradition of providing really high quality hospitality. So what I looked at is, how do we see the history of that being provided? I love to go back, and I was literally just reading old newspapers online, which is, kind of one of my crazy habits. But and I found this article about a woman named Myra Miller, and I'll read this to you in case you can't read it. Myra Miller, the famous cake maker, perhaps the best known of any colored woman in the city, in Atlanta, died at her house, 60 Ivy Street, yesterday afternoon. This is from 1891. She has served in her occupation of cake baking, in which she was thoroughly proficient, the best and most prominent people of the city, and the esteem in which she was held was manifested by the constant inquiries concerning her condition for several days past. In fact, several telegrams to that effect have been sent from people in Georgia who knew and highly respected her. Myra Miller was a Black woman who was an in-demand maker of fruit cakes. That was the popular cake of the time. They could be shipped. She had clients all over the state. But when you think about making fruit cake, I want to remind you, you're shaking your head. It takes a lot of strength. It's a really stiff batter. Does anybody here ever make fruit cakes in your household? Okay, a couple people? Yeah. So that's an old tradition. Do y'all still make fruit cakes? You do? Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, you're carrying on the tradition of Myra Miller. So I like to start from her, a reminder of the way in which we had these wonderful skilled cooks. Now, the first woman I'm going to talk about is Mrs. Dull. And she's perhaps the most poorly named person I've run across in my history, because she was anything but dull. Now, does anybody heard of Mrs. Dull? Do you perhaps have this cookbook at home? Some folks do, yeah. So she's described as she literally wrote the book on Southern cooking. So Mrs. Dull began her interest in cooking as a child. She hung out in the kitchen. She learned to cook. But she was of a socioeconomic class that she didn't really expect to have to cook, and she certainly didn't expect to have a job. She married, had, I believe, 6 children, and her husband became ill, and she needed to find a way to take care of her family. One of the ways many women who went back out to the workforce, and it happened very commonly. So this was about the turn of the 20th century, and so she started baking cakes and started catering, and this was the time new technology causes change, and gas stoves were new. And the gas company was looking for somebody to teach women how to cook on a gas stove. So they hired Mrs. Dull. So she became a public speaker. It's not very common. It was not very common at the time for women to go out and speak in public, but she was speaking to groups of women, and she was teaching them how to use her cook stove, the new gas stove. So she was a gas company employee for a long time. And then one of the Atlanta papers, and I'll confess, the Journal, couldn't remember which one, in 1920, she had such fame as a cook, they said to her, would you come and be on our writing staff? And so she came to the journal and started writing. She didn't really know how to write, so she turned to another woman on the staff who was a great writer, Margaret Mitchell. You look like you could give my talk. You keep nodding, yeah. So Margaret Mitchell helped Mrs. Dull learn to be a good writer, but I don't think she knew how to have a good turn of phrase. One of my favorite phrases from Mrs. Dull is, a cook stove is like a husband. You have to learn to live with it and get the most out of it. I don't think she was dull. So she was writing for the newspaper, and then she wrote this cookbook that became a real standard in many Southern households. So I turned to Mrs. Dull thinking, what did people make for Christmas dinner in the 1920s, 1930s? Here we have a typical Christmas dinner. This is a menu from her cookbook. It doesn't look that different than what we do today. She says roast turkey, dry rice, dry stuffing. I'm not sure why she says dry. Candied sweet potatoes, buttered green beans. She says cranberry or grape jelly. Celery hearts, hot biscuits, sweet butter, ambrosia or syllabub, cake and coffee. So kind of a simple meal. I don't know about your household. My husband has a very big extended family. We have a much more complicated menu than this for Thanksgiving. But this gives us a sense of what folks were eating. Now, does anybody here ever make ambrosia? Okay, a few people. So I moved to Atlanta in 1986. I'd never heard of ambrosia before I moved here. Here's a reminder of what ambrosia is, the recipe. Oranges with flaked coconut and sugar. So as a historian, I kind of step back and go, okay, so what does this tell us about the way the world was changing? Coconuts. The United States started to import coconuts when the Philippines became a territory. And so cooks, and we'll see this some other times, whenever cooks had new ingredients, often because of new trade opportunities, recipes changed and new things developed. So is this similar to the recipe you do for ambrosia?
Exactly, except we add
Pecans. Yes, so we're seeing this interesting mix of local things here in Georgia, pecans, of imported goods from coconuts, used to be from the Philippines, oranges probably from Florida. So we see the way in which Atlantans were taking advantage of a lot of things. Here's another menu from Mrs. Dull, and I don't know if you can see any of this. It includes things like oyster cocktails. Did anybody know that Atlanta actually was a great place to buy oysters in the first half of the 20th century? And that's because of our train lines, the very train lines that are right here in Decatur. Atlanta had a great variety of foods that was coming here because we were so well connected to other parts of the South. And we had a lot of restaurants that served oysters like Kimball House in Decatur does today. What else have we got? We see pecans on this list, biscuits, and then this map from Mrs. Dull's cookbook reminding us of where different delicacies come from around the Southeast. Now, also on that list was beaten biscuits. Has anybody here ever made beaten biscuits? Have you eaten beaten biscuits? No. So beaten biscuits they're more like hardtack, and they were a biscuit that was made when you needed things to be preserved for a longer time, and how you made them was exactly what it's called. You beat them. And different families had different traditions of beating them with a rolling pin. The picture I have here, does anybody recognize what that device is? Exactly. The old wringer from a washing machine. So what you wanted to do was really beat that biscuit. So in this case, they put it through the old washing machine wringer. I don't think they were also washing with it. If I understood this right, this had now become a kitchen implement. So different recipes prescribe different times for how long you have to beat it. Some say 15 minutes, some say 30 to 45 minutes. People use things like rolling pins, hammers, or the side of an axe to make their beaten biscuits. One person even said, Granny used to beat it with a musket. So anyway, one writer said, what you really need to make good beaten biscuits is a grandmother with stout arms. They're hard. They're kind of like crackers. You make them thin and put some, poke holes in them, and they're more like crackers, as nearly as I can understand. I'm going to confess, I've never eaten one. Some people describe it as like hardtack. So there were some desserts, I think a little more similar. She has 2 cream desserts, white charlotte or yellow charlotte. Does anybody make charlottes? It's so few. It's basically lady fingers lining and a mixture of whipping cream and egg whites, and then also just something as simple as Christmas apples. So we see the way in which local produce is still really important to what we're eating, pecans, apples, and things like that. Now, I included this one because I think it's kind of interesting. Has anybody here eaten hominy? Hominy, okay. And do you prepare your own? Get it from the can. That's all I've had. I tried it from a can because I was curious. Anybody have anything other than a can option? No. So Mrs. Dull, excuse me? Okay. She has a couple recipes and she credits somebody, Mrs. L, Mrs. F, for different recipes. But I think hominy is interesting because it reminds us of our connection to the Native Americans who lived here before we did. For many, many generations, the Muskogee or Creek Indians were living here. The first white settlers were learning things from them, and the Indians were eating hominy. And so perhaps we're seeing that connection and that continuation of that tradition. As we think about special celebrations, is everybody hearing me all right? I'm trying to stick close to the microphone. Thinking about special celebrations, I had to throw this one in. The picture you see in front of you is a dinner from January 15th, 1909. President-elect William Howard Taft came to Atlanta, and this was a big event in the city history. They really celebrated him. If you look closely, I believe every single person in the room is male. But the paper celebrated it. There was much coverage. They wanted to have a really excellent dinner. And what they served him was possum. Possum. I didn't include the recipe for possum. And maybe I won't ask if anybody here has eaten possum. I haven't. But it was a common, it was a common thing that people ate. There was a recipe in Mrs. Dull's cookbook on how to prepare it. It included like scraping the skin and things like that. But when I think about, well, why would they have this honored guest? Because we use food to communicate who we are as a community, and possum was part of the Southern experience. It had been important foodstuff. The South had been very poor for a very long time, and so we were going to serve possum, and that was perfectly fine. So now I'm going to go on to my second favorite woman, and again, just a dynamic woman. The Francis Virginia Tea Room was founded by Francis Virginia Whittle, I think it's pronounced Whitaker. Does anybody know the right way to pronounce her? Did anybody ever go to the Francis Virginia Tea Room? It was open into the 1960s. Okay, so I do walking tours, so I'm really interested in what do we see in the landscape that reminds us of how people live their lives, and what are women's lives like? And it's changing, but historically there was almost no mention of women in downtown Atlanta. The Francis Virginia Tea Room was a single exception because she had a sign on her restaurant on Peachtree Street. This is at the corner of Peachtree and Ellis. The Candler Building is what you see in the center. And it had her silhouette on it. So it's a very rare occasion in mid-century Atlanta for a woman to have a public presence. That always interests me. And now again, I have a cookbook, and that preserves this memory. This is a cookbook created by, I believe it was one of her nieces, a family member. So Frances Virginia was professionally trained as an economist. She was very interested in nutrition and healthy food, in economical food, and she had done had various jobs, but in the 1920s, she came downtown and she decided she would found a restaurant. And she hired a mix of black and white women. She was surprising for her time because she paid everybody the same wage, regardless, based on their job, but not based on their race. It was not a segregated restaurant. at the time, but she treated her employees very well, and she maintained the restaurant for a very long time. Her aunt and her mother and her sister, it's kind of a family affair too. I think they were running the cash register, but literally hundreds, if not thousands of people would eat here. It was one weekend, they fed something like equal to 10% of the population of Atlanta. Now, this would have been a lot of visitors because this was a time when you got on the train and you came downtown to shop. And even if you lived in Norcross or Forsyth, you could get on the train and come in for the day and shop. So this would have been a popular place for day visitors or overnight visitors. People, even back in the 1930s and 40s, especially the 40s probably, didn't always cook Thanksgiving at home. So she has the menu of what she cooked and served in Thanksgiving. It was a very popular day to be at the restaurant. We see some of the same things. Oyster bisque. Remember I told you oysters were very available in Atlanta. Roast turkey, giblet gravy, 4 different desserts. She was a nutritionist, but she also was very well known for her desserts. So I'm going to share a few of her recipes, and then we'll go on to Jiffy. Let me check my notes here. One of the things she has on her menu is aspic. Used to be very popular in menus. It's kind of gone out of style. Again, we see a technology change that led to things like aspic because I think in the 1890s, a man named Knox invented powdered gelatin. Prior to that, you had to boil down animal bones to get gelatin. Suddenly, it was much easier to create firmness in your food. And so all kinds of new kinds of food were available. Aspics were one of them. In the Francis Virginia Tea Room, there are 16 different aspic recipes, including 4 that would serve 40 or more people. So a little reminder, things that we probably don't have on our Thanksgiving table today. And then, when you look at her desserts, something stands out to me as a historian, and that is she has pumpkin pie, a classic we would still do today. But she was remembered for the delicious whipped cream that she put on it, which included a little bit of sherry. And most of her desserts include some kind of sauce that had a little bit of alcohol. Mine is pretty small here. One has wine and the other has dry sherry, or I think rum. So, this was a time when women did not drink in public. It would not have been acceptable. And generally, there were a lot of non-drinkers. They really relished coming to the Francis Virginia Tea Room and her very special desserts. So I think what we see in these 2 stories of Mrs. Dull and the tea room is some continuity. The same things we're serving today, turkey, dressing, but also some traditions that maybe we've lost over the years. Aspics, beaten biscuits, a variety. And I like to see the changes and I like to see the similarities. So within my own family, so I'm from Ohio. My husband is a native Georgian and deep roots in the South. My sister-in-law created this family cookbook. And I thought I would, before I turn the stage over to Jiffy, I would share this with you. It was a cookbook we used for years, and I love how my sister-in-law did it. It's very simple. She just typed it up, printed it out, and put a spiral bind on the side. She did it as a tribute to her mother, who was aging and was no longer cooking, and is in the naming of the different recipes, she credits who that recipe comes from. It included people like her Aunt Dee Dee, who had passed away, Aunt Jenna, who was still alive, Aunt Ella, who I don't even know who that was. I've been in this family for 35 years. And I'm really pleased that they were willing to put a Northerner like me in it, my sweet potato recipe. So I think it's fascinating to look at cookbooks like Mrs. Dull's and the Francis Virginia Tea Room that are treasured parts of many people's households, but it's also really terrific to save your own memories. I'm going to turn you over to Jiffy and let her share some stories.
Thank you, Amy. And I think contrary to what I said originally, I am going to stand back here because I could hear you really well. I hadn't planned on this, but as you were talking about Mrs. Dole and how she had to take over sort of as the breadwinner, it reminded me of a book I'm going to talk about here in a minute, where my client's great-grandmother also was an at-home cook.
Here, I'll walk around.
Thanks. An at-home cook who started a cafe in her small Appalachian town the small Appalachian town in West Virginia. And then she had to go out to California for some reason, and why not start another cafe out in Long Beach, California? So that was often for women in these eras the way that we supported ourselves and our families. I love these two pictures here. Long live home cooking. Whether it is, to Amy's point, the recipes we pass down are in many ways our linkages, and then for many of us, our legacies as families. And whether we are cooking the photo on the left is a church supper, and the photo on the right is a very happy woman getting her Thanksgiving dinner out on the table, and please God, can I eat? So what do you have to make your holiday, whatever holiday you're thinking of, a holiday? Give me some examples, please. Fruitcake over here, yes. What else do you make that it's not your holiday without? Yeah.
Cranberry sauce.
Cranberry sauce.
Make corn pudding.
Corn pudding.
Mincemeat.
Mincemeat.
I don't make it, but that goes back.
That's, yeah. Well, for me, yeah. A fan favorite over the generations. I think many of us can do linkage with macaroni and cheese. And sorry? Ambrosia. All right, if you want some recipes, Amy's got some. For me, for Christmas, which is the holiday that we celebrate, it's not Christmas without Danish oatmeal cookies. Now, I have no Danish background. This was my mother's handwriting. This was my mother's recipe. I, as a kid, growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it wasn't Christmas without Danish oatmeal cookies. And for my children, it's not Christmas. And for my grandchild, we're going to be making them this weekend when she sleeps over. My mother collected recipes, as many of our mothers did, either in nice, tidy boxes like my mother's were, or cut out from newspapers or cut from letters they received and put in envelopes or just in a box all over the place, which was what my grandmothers were like. My mother saved her recipes because she cooked a lot. She also loved history. And she also needed to have them just in case. She passed away recently, and I inherited these recipe boxes of hers. And I make, as I said about the Danish oatmeal cookies, I make a number of them, but here's one I don't make. It's kind of gone the way of the possum, suet steamed pudding. Does that ring a bell with anybody?
Yes.
Really? Really? What did it taste like? A steamed pudding. Okay. Like a fruit cake. It's kind of a thick sort of steamed, yeah. And then you say, yeah, it says on here, steam 3 hours in a buttered pudding pan. Well, if you want, I'll share this with you. You can try it. Now that you've said that, maybe I'll try it. Anyway, many of us are fortunate, like I am, to inherit a family recipe collection. And a recipe collection, as we're talking about holiday traditions and passing along legacy and whatever, is one way of maintaining that. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you today too was, how do you pass on these recipes and traditions and that sort of thing? And I have 3 examples with me of books that my clients have done with me that talk about sharing family food and recipes. And the first one is Liz. And Liz was tired of answering her son's phone calls. You can tell that this was before we were all texting each other all the time. Who kept calling to ask her, Mom, how do I make blah, blah, blah? So for her Christmas one year, she put together these family recipes and put them in a book. And in this book, she passes along time-tested recipes and time-tested practices. I've circled in blue there. The day after Thanksgiving, boil the turkey carcass in water to cover for 2 hours and drain. And that way you will have your broth, which then becomes the base for soups and other things to come. Well, that's something she knew to do, and many of us know to do, but I can guarantee you my granddaughter doesn't have a clue. The other thing that I love in particular about Liz's book is she's an amateur photographer as well as a home cook par excellence. So she just didn't take pictures of the food she made. In fact, above that turkey corn soup, you can see there's a picture. It's got some tomatoes and maybe an artichoke and then a bowl of glass. The last page in her book is a short written piece she did called Of Food and Family, where she describes her rural Pennsylvania upbringing, which included deliveries of milk and eggs and bread. And again, something totally unfamiliar to her children and to her grandchildren, but a history, an American history, a rural history that is worth saving and passing along. And speaking of histories, I want to introduce you to Anita's mother. Anita, Liz's book was specifically like a recipe book for her sons. Anita's book was a tribute to her mother. And her mother was well known as a preeminent cook and hostess in their hometown of Columbus, Georgia. And this is a picture of her mother's very famous red velvet cake. How many of you all have a very famous red velvet cake in your repertoire? It's a part of our southern heritage. And as you can see here, that recipe was well worn and well loved. In fact, those are 3 different copies of the recipe because you couldn't see it anymore. And in this book, Anita is also shares that Southern hospitality, the way that Amy had talked about earlier, and really wanted to preserve her mother and for her children and grandchildren, that sort of thing. And this was her wish for putting together this book. You can read it, but I'll read it too. I hope Mother's recipes and her cooking, her legacy, will be passed on from generation to generation. My last book is from Bill, And we already met one of his great-grandmothers who had the City Cafe in rural West Virginia and then moved to Long Beach and opened it again. For Bill, growing and preserving food, cooking and baking it, is part of his DNA from both sides of his family. His father's family in Appalachia. His mother's family were German immigrants who came around the turn of the 20th century and lived on Long Island. And both sides of his family were cooks. I want to go back here. So we've got, how many of y'all are seed savers or gardeners? You know, growing tomatoes or cucumbers if you can keep them away from the squirrels here in Metro Atlanta. Well, Mama, who is Bill's grandmother, was quite a gardener, and she had these heirloom tomatoes called Old Stripers. And that's what this picture is of an old striper. And what they do every year is keep some of those seeds, even now, because they can propagate and keep growing these heirloom tomatoes. And from them, she would pickle and preserve, and Bill and his family still do that, and wanted to pass along. He, in his book, did a lot of writing and telling of the old stories. And he also included this from his Aunt Lorraine, which is his mother's German side. Turns out she was the head of the dining room at a large Manhattan advertising company for 40 years. So she was a professional cook as well as a beloved family cook. And these would be Bill's answer to my question, what can't you have a holiday without? You gotta have Aunt Lorraine's cherry tarts, jelly tarts if you're gonna have a holiday. All right, so what about you? How do you preserve your holiday food traditions, and how do you pass those on? A number of us are fortunate, as I am. I have two grand girls at this point. One of them lives here in Atlanta, the other lives in Seattle. Both of them like to cook. And so I like to cook with them because we make stuff like Danish oatmeal cookies that they wouldn't necessarily make otherwise. And that is a good way of passing along tradition. Also, eating together. Sorry about that. Also, eating together is another way of sharing these. And when we were all growing up, I'm going to lump myself in because we're all of a certain age, I think we ate at home a lot more. And the family dinner was a more regular part of life than maybe it is for I see with my children and grandchildren. I don't judge that. That's life is just as it is. But to intentionally make the opportunity to sit down together as generations and share food across the generations and share the making of food across the generations is something that I treasured as a child growing up. And maybe y'all have similar memories of cooking and sharing meals with family, even the ones maybe that annoyed you to death, like that uncle.
Always an uncle.
Always that uncle. Yeah, my brother prided himself on being that uncle, by the way. So whether you're cooking together or sharing foods together, eating, you're collecting family recipes, you might even make a recipe book, whether it is simply scanning these days or even photocopying. You can go down to Kinko's or whatever and take these old recipes, put them on the plat and make some copies of them, put them together in a book. Or you can we can do something a little more colorful, like this is Liz's book. These are Shutterfly. You all have, all heard of Shutterfly. I have a job because of Shutterfly, by the way, because so many people make them and are disappointed after all the time they took with them that I hear from those people more often. But anyway, this is what Liz did herself and did a copy for each of her sons. Truth be told, her cousins got wind of this and asked for books for the following Christmas. So I don't know, this says book 1. I think she was prescient because she's on book 5 now. This is Anita's book. This is Anita's book, and again, it was more of a storytelling, but because her book, her mother was, so much of her life was around cooking, it played a big role. And then finally, I brought you this one, and this is Bill's. And it is more story than recipe, but again, some families have food inextricably tied in who you all are and your identities. So I encourage you to think about intentionally how you may save and share these holiday traditions and recipes in a way that we often just this is what we do, take it for granted. I encourage you to be a little more intentional about that. So, do you want to take some questions?
Well, yeah.
If you have some? Here, I forgot one more.
Okay.
We can't forget Ida Levitas. Ida Levitas, her husband was a congressman, Elliot Levitas, here in DeKalb County. And she had a very famous chocolate mandel bread. And I worked with the family, the Levitases were part of the family that I ended up working with. But in this picture here, we've got the Shabbat dinner menu and then also the chocolate mandel bread recipe. So I wanted to be sure to share that with you. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, thank you for letting us come. Jiffy and I have been talking about this for so long, and it's fun for us to be here and compare stories.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe we would put these books out for folks to take a look at, see if it inspires you. I love how, unlike my family cookbook, it's got color, they've included family pictures, so it's more fun. And we'll answer any questions if anybody, we'll be here to ask, to talk afterwards. Does anybody have a question they want to ask now before we?
Yeah, this might be more modern day, but how do you think Natalie Dupree has changed the food scene in the South, and particularly Atlanta?
I haven't dove deep into Natalie Dupree, and that's sort of my next step. She came out of Riches, if I remember correctly, and so that there's a way in which that whole Riches tradition, which people celebrate and love to remember. When I got married to my husband grew up in Atlanta. We got married in the first year. A birthday came along. I said, "Oh, what's your family tradition for birthday cakes?" And he said, "Well, we go to Riches and buy a coconut cake." And I was all set to bake a cake, and I don't really like coconut. So, that's my next step, I would say, But, okay. Anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Yes.
I've got a memory of, I came to Georgia Tech in the 60s, and Mary Mac's tea rooms.
Yes.
And in those days, it was one storefront wide, and it was run by little old ladies. And so Mary Mac's is something very different now. In those days, it was very much like the Virginia tea room.
They were both tea rooms, and similarly, they were started by women. One of the challenges that the founder of Mary Mac's, who I'm blanking on her name at the moment, Natalie Dupree had that experience. Women couldn't access capital. So if you were a woman and wanted to start a restaurant like Mary Mac's or Natalie Dupree's business or the Francis Virginia Tea Room, you had to go to friends and family because literally women legally could not get credit until early 1970s. So again, I'm kind of looking at the big picture of history and the challenges, and I love that we have these wonderful restaurants that have preserved those memories. And it does seem like Mary Max isn't, there's a similarity. I enjoy going there, but it's not what it once was. Yeah. Any other questions, and does anybody have anything special to your family for your family holidays that you'd like to share that we haven't heard about? Cheesecake?
Is the one thing that I can get my kids to eat, and it comes from my grandma.
Cheesecake. And where is your grandmother from?
Well, my grandmother she was Italian heritage, and she was from New Jersey.
From New Jersey, yeah, because that's not a very typical Southern tradition. And there's a person behind you?
Yeah.
Collard greens, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, there does seem to be a big collard green tradition. In my husband's family, of course, we have a lot of dishes that have to be on the table. Collard greens is one of them. But again, you're right, collard greens and black-eyed peas, more of a New Year's tradition. Yeah. Then we had a person in the back.
My grandmother always had to make the German chocolate cake.
German chocolate cake.
Always had to have a German chocolate cake.
Oh, wow, that sounds,
And Chris.
that sounds good to me. Yes,
Yes.
banana pudding.
Pudding.
Yep. Gumbo on Christmas Eve. Interesting. Yeah. And where's your family from? East. Okay, so that's that Louisiana connection. Yeah. Any other?
Yeah.
English trifle.
English trifle. Yeah, and so why is that part of your family tradition? Where does that come from? Do you know?
Well, I'm from Scotland originally, so this is part of, even now my grandchildren living here love trifle.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's your connecting to your Scottish tradition.
And don't forget the paper hat, the copper.
Yes.
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 It's my brother lives in Great Britain and raised his children there, and that for them that's an essential part of Christmas. And my kids, when we're together, are like, "What? Why are we doing this?"
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
My family is from Kentucky, but when I was little, we moved to New Jersey, and
Uh-huh.
my grandmother would always send a recipe for Thanksgiving, and it had cranberries and whipped cream, pineapple, nuts, all that. And she would write to my mother, and my mother got the recipe, and we're sitting there eating this like soup. And then the next letter, she says, "Oh, did I tell you to freeze that?" So then that became a tradition for my family.
The soup version or the frozen version?
Yeah, it's like a dessert.
So maybe that's a reminder that if you are inspired from this to create a family cookbook, to test your recipes before you print it.
This is really particularly Christmas, because my mother was the bread baker.
Uh-huh.
And when I got married, I realized, ooh, I want some of that homemade bread. I didn't know how to do it. And so she came to my house and she brought this little saucepan with her because she did it all just kind of by the seat of her pants. And she said, well, you fill up this little saucepan with milk, and that's where you start. And we had to fill it up, pour it in a measuring cup, and determine what it was. So she wrote down all the steps so that I could make her bread. And I still have this treasured little piece of paper with her handwriting and all the now correctly measured quantities.
Yeah.
Can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah, oh, you want me to go back?
I want to jump in for a minute. Can you hear me? I do have one of those voices. Those treasured recipes of yours, you have here, you have there, the tool you need in your phone to preserve them. And that is to take a picture of them. And when you do that, It will be hard to do it if you do it in your kitchen or inside, not to get a shadow. So I recommend on a day like today, taking it outside, lay it flat, and then, can I borrow this for a second? And then take your camera and make sure it's flat and take it directly over your recipe. And then you will have done the first step to saving and sharing your recipes so that when you're not here, they can still be here.
Well, I'll share one more thing. So I did a home tour once, and a kitchen was decorated with an oversized print of a photograph of a recipe card. And I thought that was so clever. And I have my mother's 99 years old, and I have my grandmother's recipe cards. And I thought, oh, I'll do that. And so I did exactly what Jiffy described, very carefully took a good picture. I wasn't sure I could do it myself, but it worked fine. I sent it off to probably Shutterfly to have them do an oversized print and had it dry mounted. And I decorated my kitchen with it. I don't have it up at the moment. That's another story. But it was Mrs. Smith's chocolate cake. This was my grandmother's next door neighbor. The next time my mother came, she was only about 91 at that point, and she looked up to see in my kitchen her mother's handwriting. My grandmother died in 1976, and she was just so touched. And it's the way seeing those old things and that connection. And that launched her into telling me a story about my grandmother's next door neighbor who lived next to them for like 15 years. It took about 10 years for my grandmother to get on a first name basis with Mrs. Smith or whatever it was next door. Again, a reminder that times change, but all of that, we had this wonderful connection, this wonderful conversation out of just this, and especially the oversized recipe card, I think somehow has a cool impact, so.
Yep. And the handwriting. If you have things with handwriting, I don't care if they're stained, if they look like one of those early Anita's mother's red velvet cake things, take pictures of them.
Oh, yeah.
Because our handwriting is unique to each of us. And it will flood you in ways that seem particularly appropriate during the holidays.
Well, we've kept you for so long.
Yes.
We're here and happy to answer questions. Jiffy's books are around.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming. We've loved hearing your stories.
Thank you.
This has been very fun.